Imagine being just 6 years old, your tiny hands clutching a school bag almost too big for your shoulders, and walking through a roaring crowd of angry faces shouting words you don't even fully understand, yet you know they're aimed at you. This was the world of Ruby Bridges in 1960, a little girl who would unknowingly become a symbol of courage and change. Ruby was born in Tylertown, Mississippi, in 1954, the same year the Supreme Court of the United States had declared that segregation in schools was unconstitutional. Yet the real fight for equality was only just beginning, and in the Deep South, the color of your skin still decided where you could eat, play, or learn. When Ruby was 4 years old, her parents moved to New Orleans in search of better opportunities, not knowing that fate would soon place their daughter at the center of one of the most important battles in American history. In 1960, a federal court ordered Louisiana to desegregate its schools, which meant that black children would now be allowed to attend schools that had once been reserved for white children only, and Ruby was one of just 6 black children selected to take part in this historic step forward. While the others were sent to different schools, Ruby was chosen to attend William Frantz Elementary, a previously all-white school just a few blocks from her home, and the day she first walked into that school became a moment etched forever in the story of civil rights. On the morning of November 14, 1960, Ruby dressed neatly in a white dress and polished shoes, her hair tied with ribbons, looking like any other first grader excited for school, except this was no ordinary school day. Outside her home stood 4 federal marshals sent by the President of the United States to protect her, because the streets were lined with furious white citizens determined to stop her from entering. As Ruby climbed into the car with the marshals, she didn't fully grasp why strangers hated her so much. She only knew that her mother had told her she was doing something important and that God would watch over her. When the car pulled up to the school, the scene exploded into chaos. Hundreds of men and women waving signs that screamed, "Keep our schools white," mothers pulling their children away from the school gates, angry voices cursing at a little girl who had done nothing wrong but want to learn. Rocks and tomatoes were thrown, people spat at her, yet Ruby, holding the hand of one marshal, walked bravely up the steps, her head held high, her small figure looking even smaller against the sea of hostility, and though her heart pounded, she kept moving forward. Inside the school, things weren't easier. Many teachers refused to have her in their classrooms, parents of white students withdrew their children, and Ruby often found herself walking down silent, empty hallways echoing with the sound of her own footsteps. But what made her courage remarkable was that she never lashed out, never cried in public, and never turned back. She simply walked into that building every morning and out again every afternoon as if she belonged there, because deep down, she knew she did. Ruby later said she imagined the crowd outside was just another Mardi Gras parade, people dressed up and shouting for fun, and perhaps that was the innocent strength of a child, seeing fear as something less scary, transforming hate into noise, and choosing to keep walking. Her bravery on that first day was not just about attending school. It was about confronting the ugly truth of prejudice with the quiet dignity of a child who believed in learning and fairness. That single walk from the car to the classroom was a journey longer than miles, a journey through the storm of hatred into the light of history, and though Ruby didn't know it then, she was laying down a path for millions of children after her to walk freely, hand in hand, into any classroom without fear or division. The world remembers Ruby Bridges not because she fought with fists or shouted back at the crowd, but because she showed that sometimes the strongest weapon is the calm courage of a child who refuses to be broken, and in her tiny steps lay the giant strides of a nation slowly moving toward justice. Inside William Frantz Elementary, Ruby Bridges quickly discovered that walking past the angry mob was only the beginning of her challenge, because once she entered the classrooms she found them almost completely empty, the sound of her shoes clicking against the polished floors echoing louder than ever, as most parents had withdrawn their children from the school in protest against her presence, leaving Ruby to face the strange reality of being the only student in her grade. Day after day she walked into the building with her small lunch pail, sat at her desk in a silent classroom, and learned not from a group of children but from one extraordinary teacher named Barbara Henry, who had recently moved from Boston and refused to let prejudice dictate her heart, treating Ruby with the kindness, attention, and respect every child deserves. Mrs. Henry taught Ruby everything she would have taught a full class: reading, writing, math, and even art projects, speaking to her as though the classroom were buzzing with children, never letting Ruby feel abandoned or forgotten. And slowly Ruby's confidence grew. Because in the middle of so much hate stood one adult who believed in her, and that belief was powerful enough to keep her going. While Ruby's lessons continued inside, outside the world still burned with anger. The mob never gave up, shouting louder each morning, some people carrying signs, others hurling threats. Yet Ruby kept walking, holding her head high and whispering quiet prayers as her marshals led her through the chaos. There were days when the pressure became so heavy even her family struggled. Her father lost his job, her grandparents were forced off their land, grocery stores refused to serve her mother. But Ruby's parents reminded her that she was not only fighting for herself, she was fighting for every child who came after, and Ruby, though still just 6 years old, carried that responsibility on her tiny shoulders with remarkable grace. One day a child psychologist named Robert Coles came to study Ruby because he couldn't understand how such a young girl could withstand so much hatred without breaking down, and what he discovered amazed him. Ruby prayed every day on her way to school, not for herself, but for the people in the crowd, asking God to forgive them because, as she said, they don't know what they're doing, and that strength of heart turned her from an ordinary child into a symbol of extraordinary compassion. As months turned into years, Ruby kept learning, kept growing, and her courage quietly inspired others. Slowly, parents began to send their children back, teachers returned to their classrooms, and William Frantz Elementary started to look like a real school again, proving that change, though slow, was unstoppable. Ruby's friendship with Mrs. Henry lasted long beyond that first year, and decades later Ruby would say that without her teacher she could never have survived those days, because Barbara Henry had not only taught her school lessons but had given her hope when the world outside tried to take it away. Ruby Bridges' bravery was later recognized as one of the turning points of the civil rights movement, her simple act of going to school every day helping America take another step toward equality, and though she was just one child in a big, divided country, her story spread across the nation, reminding people that change often begins with the smallest among us. Years later, Ruby would continue to work for education and equality, meeting presidents, being honored in books and paintings, even having her story told to new generations of children. Yet she always remembered herself not as a hero, but simply as a little girl who wanted to learn. Her courage, her teacher's kindness, and her family's sacrifices together created a legacy that still shines today, showing us that bravery is not about fighting back with anger, but about standing firm with dignity, patience, and love. The moral of Ruby Bridges' journey is clear. No matter how small you are, no matter how loud the world shouts against you, one person's courage can light the way for millions, and with kindness and education, even the deepest divides can be healed, proving that children, with their pure hearts and fearless steps, can indeed change history.